Touch the Lake, welcome to the fourth day of the week-long virtual talk series on 4 principal commitments of His Holiness the Great 14th Dalai Lama. This initiative by the Department of Information and International Relations, Central Tibetan Administration, is a part of the celebration of the year 2020 as a year of gratitude to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Today's panel on the 4 principal commitments of His Holiness the Great 14th Dalai Lama will feature Rajiv Mehrotra, Secretary and Trustee of the Foundation for Universal Responsibility of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, New Delhi, Dr. Anthony Goedhals, an author and lecturer at the University of Pretoria in South Africa, Tony Steele, the former president of Dalai Lama in Australia Organising Committee, and Robert Thurman, an American Buddhist author and an academic.
Thank you very much for this great opportunity and this great privilege. I really am no one special, and I think ultimately our accomplishments are who we are and not really the things that we might have done. And I really have to confess that not only am I no one special, I'm just a sadhaka on the journey of life, along with billions of others like you, all of you here, who are fellow travelers. And so I'm only here to just share some of my learning, some aspects of my journey, my struggles and failures, and hope that they might add some value to your own journey and to your own striving. I have been deeply privileged and blessed to have been a student of His Holiness the Dalai Lama for some 40 years, and that I think really is a tribute to his enormous compassion and his great patience. I usually like to sort of reassure myself and to reassure my audience of His Holiness's real evaluation of me. And I remember that some 30 years ago, I'd done my first significant book called The Mind of the Guru, which His Holiness was kind enough to release at a function at the India Habitat Center. And here I was sort of feeling on top of Mount Everest, quite literally, that my teacher was releasing my book, and it was a hall full of friends and television cameras and what have you. And soon after, the release, the formal release was over, and His Holiness began to speak. And he said, well, Rajiv, he's a student of mine, and he works very hard and he tries very hard. But how much he knows, I don't really know. And I think that description has stayed and was reconfirmed recently. We were inaugurating a Dalai Lama chair for Nalanda studies at Goa University, and I was on stage with His Holiness. And so again, he spoke generously of our long association and said, but he's liking to sleep a lot. I wish he'd work a little harder. So I just wanted to let you know that the person before you who's purporting to share his insights and wisdom, that this is firmly where my guru places me. Just a few words really about the Dalai Lama himself and what we learn, as I said, from who he is, as we should, about who people are rather than merely what they do. And he's 85 years old. He's currently he was in retreat and then went into isolation when COVID struck. And till very recently, here was the preeminent Buddhist monk who continued to receive instruction from lamas younger than himself, in terms of the oral transmission that gets handed down from generations and from lama to lama of the different strands of practice. And he was practicing 6, 7, 8 hours a day. And this was a man who we regard as the embodiment of the Buddha, of the Buddhist aspect of the Buddha aspect of compassion. And that really is to sort of, share, the very notion, the very idea that we are all, travelers, even when we are considered by others as sort of evolved human beings. And whatever our aspirations and struggles to living fulfilled lives, it involves sadhana, practice, and effort. And I think for someone in my position, most of all. So all of us are united in many ways, in all ways really, by the fact that we share the planet we live on and the communities we live in. All of us crave a happy life and to be at peace with ourselves and with others. We seek this fulfillment in diverse ways, depending on, as I will try and share with you, our mental dispositions, but mostly from outside elements or the externalities, struggling with various levels of dissatisfaction over who we are and our situation. And when we think of the Dalai Lama, what do we see? We see a man, though he is a preeminent Buddhist monk, and touching the lives of millions of people across the world, people of diverse faiths, or even no faith at all, from different economic status and religions, nationalities, and what have you. He's a man in a simple maroon yellow robes, and he describes himself as a simple Buddhist monk. A human being whose smiling face and infectious laughter impacts us in a myriad ways. But he is intensely human, and he holds out to us a sense of the aspiration, the highest aspiration that we can achieve. But most of all, and this is the first value that he embodies that I would really like to flag, and has enormous significance in today's deeply divided and fragmented world. He is a man who celebrates diversity, plurality, reaching out to all sentient beings that they might lead fulfilling lives at peace with each other and with Mother Earth. He embraces and is open to learning from all traditions, streams of knowledge, and faiths. One of my most amongst my many very memorable moments with His Holiness the Dalai Lama has been, some years ago we organized, when the 50th anniversary of the Tibetans in exile, we organized a program of visits by a group of religious leaders led by His Holiness to the places of pilgrimage and worship of different traditions. And so here was the Dalai Lama going into the Jama Masjid in Delhi, putting on a skull cap and doing the namaz. Not just syncretically talking about another faith, but engaging in its rituals so that he could get a glimpse, an experiential glimpse of that particular faith and what he could learn from it. And then he went to a church and sang Christian hymns. And the bishop put a necklace around him with a cross. And with that cross and the necklace, he goes into a Sikh Gurdwara and ties a turban on his head, takes up a turban and goes to a temple and does the arti. So I think that, when we talk about values and fulfilling ourselves, here is somebody who is demonstrating so vividly and publicly his willingness, his motivation, his determination to love and to learn from diverse sources. And one of the major commitments of his life at age 85 is to promote these, not as an aspect of a particular faith or belief or system of knowledge, but something that could be practiced or form the basis of spiritual practice as a system that draws on the shared wisdom of all human experience and learning. So this is the man who, I will try and share a few thoughts of some of his, core ideas that make him one of the preeminent spiritual leaders and guides of our times. At the everyday level, in a sense, and as commonplace wisdom, he continues to remind us that we are far too invested in sensorial fulfillment or material fulfillment that the physical and the material world offers us. And inevitably, that leads to dissatisfaction and unfulfilled lives. We spend so much time nurturing the body, our physical appearance, our physical possessions, and even educating our minds, but with the goal, the aspiration that somehow that will get us more lucrative careers and jobs and professions so that we can earn more money. The essence of a healthy, happy life for His Holiness the Dalai Lama is for us to understand and respond to and accept the true nature of reality and the universal values and conditions that underline the human situation. His Holiness would sort of tell us that we suffer because we do not truly understand and accept these. He often talks about the Nalanda tradition and describes himself as one of the heirs of the Nalanda tradition and India's civilizational heritage. As I cannot repeat myself often enough, not in any exclusive sense, but to celebrate his heritage, the legacy that he carries forward. And the genius of that heritage and legacy was that it provided both the wisdom, which means the intellectual knowledge, insights, and concepts, but equally the method. The methods that we could use to internalize wisdom so that it impacted our deepest reflexive responses. And this is so important because we can so often be deeply impressed by a speaker or a book that we have read and know that, it is not healthy for us to be angry or to be jealous or to be materially acquisitive, but yet we're not able to manage that reflexive response when the moment arises. So the great contribution of this heritage is that it dovetails method and wisdom. And I will point to a few aspects of the method, but let me just stay for a while with the wisdom aspect, because all of these, in a sense, underline the values that His Holiness recommends and the methods by which we can internalize them and make them our own. When we talk about understanding the nature of reality, he is deeply inspired, as has been the Buddhist tradition, by the insights or the articulations, let me say, the insights may have pre-existed of quantum physics, which tells us that the very presence of the observer impacts not merely the perception, but the nature of reality itself. And the minute we're able to recognize that, whether it is through celebrating diversity and going to places of worship of different traditions and experiencing the reality of different people's experience of their tradition, or we look at the wisdom of modern science, we begin to recognize that there is no single reality, that each one of us experiences and perceives reality differently. His Holiness, extending this further, a few years ago, there was, it was the centenary of Swami Vivekananda, and at the Ramakrishna Mission in Delhi, His Holiness paid great tribute to Sri Ramakrishna and then to Swami Vivekananda. And that was really because, here was Sri Ramakrishna, who was considered an avatar and, a god in human form. And what did he do? He, in full public display, in a sense, engaged in the techniques and practices, the sadhanas, as a sadhaka of the different strands of Hindu practice and aspiration. And then he didn't stop there. What does he do? He steps out of the temple precincts and goes and lives in a little cottage and lives the life of a Muslim, including eating the diet of a Muslim. And he does the same, with other traditions. And Swami Vivekananda then came in, and this is a very important synchronicity, in a sense, this aspect of what His Holiness is telling us, so Swami Vivekananda comes in and says tells us and suggests, 4 different archetypes, which is sort of, the karma yogi, the man of action, Jnana yogi, the man of wisdom, Raj yogi, the man of practice, and bhakti. So, the different human personalities, the proclivities, of course, no one is uniquely one or the other. And tells us that for each one of them, there is a different path or a combination of paths. So a bhakta will try and will use bhakti or worship to experience an aspect or version or a kind of reality that is most appropriate for him. And so His Holiness tells us today, and then takes off from there and re-articulates it, juxtaposed with his own striving, learning, and commitment, that each one of us has a different mental disposition. And so each one of us needs a different mental diet. So just like we need a different physical diet, we need a different mental diet. And it is this that enabled someone like Swami Vivekananda, who was a student of a bhakta, to go out and say that the Buddha is my Ishta and Ramakrishna is my master. And so it is that sort of deep respect rooted in one's very being that celebrates diversity and defines aspiration. There are some very crucial building blocks, as it were, to the quest of the Dalai Lama, and that really starts with the aspect of compassion, because His Holiness is considered the Buddha aspect of compassion, as I mentioned. And why is to be compassionate, so crucial and important? It is not merely something that's virtuous, so that a moral science class will tell you will please the gods, or that you do because you want to score brownie points. It is inherently valuable to each of us who reach a state of compassion, not merely the physical gestures of compassion, but become truly compassionate human beings. Again, His Holiness has regular engagements, conversations with scientists, including psychologists and psychologists, and testing, psychological testing that some of the great universities of the world have established that people who have mental problems or are not at peace with themselves or do not feel fulfilled have an obsession with the I, me, mine. There's a very exaggerated sense of oneself, and the self, the sense of the I that suffers. And so the practice of compassion and the techniques and methods that are associated with the practice of compassion soften that sense of the self, of the I that suffers. So a lot of practice, or the practices, that the methods that His Holiness would recommend have to do with the softening of the self. Another one of my favorite stories of His Holiness is that sometime in the 1980s I did a film on Baba Amte, and those of you who may not be familiar with the story, Baba Amte was did amazing work with leprosy, and His Holiness saw the film and said, I want to meet this man. And so we went to Anandwan, which is a 3-4 hour drive from Nagpur to Baba Amte's community. It's sort of obviously a very simple rural community where he was looking after the victims of leprosy. Anyway, we spent the night, and the next morning, Baba and His Holiness decided that they would go around the Anandwan community on their own. And at a distance, as they were walking back towards the group of us who were looking out for them, they were both weeping. And I haven't seen His Holiness, or Baba Amte for that matter, really howling. And Baba Amte had been so moved by His Holiness, and His Holiness so moved by what Baba Amte was doing, that His Holiness said, I am, you practice what I only preach. And that was such a powerful lesson. That compassion is not just what we preach, but who we are and what we do. And that has been the second amongst many. I'm just sort of picking on a few core human universal values independent of faith and tradition, or particular mental diets that we might need. That is at the core of what is, His Holiness embodies and practices. Now, as I sort of move forward a bit towards this idea of method, the method represents ways of training our mind so that it leaves imprints in the different layers of our consciousness that then govern our actions. So that really is the description, in a sense, of traditional methods of meditation. And underlying that is the belief or the experience of many practitioners that it is not so as much the action, but it is the thought that we plant or that comes up for us, and we reinforce that affects or impacts the imprints on our layers of our consciousness that govern future behavior. The second pillar of understanding that reinforces intellectually is the recognition of interdependence. How our very survival, our emotions and our feelings depend on other people. So if someone smiles at me, I feel better, I feel good. If I smile at someone else, hopefully I feel good and the other person feels good. So to recognize deeply the idea of interdependence. The second value is, or third value, I'm just sort of chalking these up, some of the key elements of this, is the idea of impermanence. That we somehow have convinced ourselves, at least moment to moment, as life unfolds, that of permanence. We sort of hang on to things as if they will be eternal and constant. And that is very closely linked to the idea of change. I mean, impermanence and change go in hand in hand. We see this happening, but yet it isn't something that we're able to internalize and reflexively believe, except when we despair. Oh, I am now growing old, and rather than seeing our aging as a natural process of reality and how it juxtaposes with the nature of reality, we tend to resist the fact that we are growing old or things are changing. Now, if you just consider that we as individuals, and it's whatever, I'm having a senior citizen moment, but we know that our cells renew themselves, so often in X number of minutes, years, and hours, or whatever it is. And we are constantly changing. Our emotions are changing. One moment we think somebody is wonderful, another moment we think they're not. Our moods, our feelings, our preferences, our sensibilities, the food we liked when we were young, we do not like anymore, etc., etc. It's changing. Simultaneous to that, the objects of our desire or need or want that we are grasping are also changing. We then look at a little closer the method dimensions, which is how we can formally imprint some of these ideas: impermanence, change, compassion, diversity, the otherness of the other, etc. So the basic principle is that you, in a practice, you sit down and you quieten the mind just by observing it, so that there is some level of stillness, and then through the mind, the intellect, and through reason and thought, which stands up to the scrutiny of logic, we begin to feed certain thoughts to our mind. But we also know that these practices have to be sustained, that if you stop doing that, it will gradually regress to its normal state. So it tells you that changing the very physiology of the brain, where emotions are stored biochemically, is possible. And much of this research has been done in universities around the world, which His Holiness has supported. And I think he has done that because he sees the modern universities as the equivalents of the ancient universities of Nalanda and the Gurukuls, which were the repository of wisdom and training of the mind. And there is a deep commitment that I always hesitate to use the word secular, because today, secular has in many cultures and discourses become a dirty word. So let's just say an inclusive environment that, so for example, in the Nalanda tradition, all ideas, discourses, and treaties that were developed by the scholars were not presented and debated and argued and refined amongst the converted or the faithful. It was vigorously engaged in by a diversity of opinions and perspectives, so it could be chiseled and refined and purified in a sense to represent something that had been through the rigorous scrutiny of the human intellect and would stand up to reason and logic. Because the reason why there are these two pillars of method and wisdom, one that works with the emotions and feelings and sensibilities while accessing the mind, and the mind does that in turn, is that unless it stands up to the scrutiny of reason and logic and felt experience, it is not likely to be an enduring transformation. So this was just to give you a flavor, and there's not that much more that I know, but to give you a flavor of the kind of values, practices that somebody like the Dalai Lama embodies, and that the principles that we might be able to assimilate to find our own particular mental diets that will make us more fulfilled, happier human beings.
Hello everyone, my name is Anthony Goedhals and I'm a lecturer at the University of Pretoria in South Africa. Today I've been asked to speak on the 4 principal commitments of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and specifically on the 2nd principle, promoting religious harmony. It is a great privilege for me to be asked by the Department of Information and International Relations of the Central Tibetan Administration to participate in the Year of Gratitude to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. My task today is to talk about how to translate His Holiness's thoughts and insights on the 2nd of his 4 principles, the promotion of religious harmony. How to translate these principles into actionable projects in the near future. So, from the start, although what I will say will be general and theoretical, the talk will end with practical steps that we can take to achieve harmony. Before I begin, I must go back a few weeks in time to when Goedhals, the representative of His Holiness in South Africa, first approached me about speaking. At first, I was afraid that such ideas were too big for me to tackle, and that I was not in a position to speak about the issues with any authority. I am just a teacher of English literature at the University of Pretoria in South Africa, and though I have just published a book on the writings of Lafcadio Hearn, one of the first Victorian Westerners to think and write in a Buddhist way, I did not at first feel that I knew enough about the social, psychological, and geopolitical factors that complicate the ways in which the many religions manifest themselves in the world today. Their history, their sociology, their psychology. It was not just this sense of my own ignorance that made me hesitate. I was also overawed by the responsibility of taking part in the debates of the Tibetan people in exile. For although I had been to India twice and took refuge with His Holiness some 2 decades ago and listened to his teachings for decades, and been a supporter of the Tibetan people since the 1990s, and consider myself to be a Buddhist, I am not a scholar of Tibetan or Tibetan studies. It seemed to me thus that I was not the right person to speak to ideas emanating from His Holiness and from the Tibetan community. This feeling persisted for some time, but gradually things began to occur to me, things that suggested I could perhaps be of some small help in the debate about religion and religious tolerance. In the first place, when I began to really think about religion, what it is and what it does, I was emboldened by the idea that His Holiness seems to think of religion as a means to an end and not as an end in itself. I remembered what he said in his 2011 book, Beyond Religion. It's entitled Beyond Religion. And it began to occur to me that this talk might be about the greater conception of religion as a system of secular ethics that serves humanity, that His Holiness outlines there, rather than just about religion as commonly understood and more narrowly defined. Suddenly, I felt that I might, in fact, be able to say something about the subject. Like many teachers, I see myself as a humanist, as a liberal humanist, and most often teach texts from a humanist point of view. Even when a text seems to be coming from a particular religious perspective, it is always at heart about the human condition, and I try to understand it primarily in this way. His Holiness speaks of the desirability of a secular ethics, as he calls it, and it therefore struck me that as a teacher and a humanist, I might have something to say about the kind of universal and secular ethics, let us call it a religion beyond religion, that His Holiness is advocating. Another thing struck me. Often it is useful to speak to travelers from unknown foreign countries, even in the age of the internet, when we can be in some place yet everywhere else as well. I am sure you all know a lot about my country, South Africa. His Holiness has been here 3 times, beginning in 1996 when he came to meet his friend President Nelson Mandela. You will also know Archbishop Desmond Tutu, another great friend of His Holiness, and another Nobel Peace Prize laureate, like His Holiness and President Mandela. With this in mind, I feel there might be some interest in the experience of a Buddhist humanist teacher of literature at a university in Pretoria, the capital city of South Africa. I know enough about the Tibetan community in exile to know what might be of relevance, and I'm ignorant enough to perhaps come up with something new and potentially of interest to you as a community, both in India and in the Tibetan diaspora throughout the rest of the world. I have been fortunate to be given hospitality by Tibetans in Pretoria, in Mumbai, in Bailakuppe, as well as in Queens, New York. I always felt as though I were among friends when I was with Tibetans. I guess it is a karmic connection, and it is certainly one of the great blessings of my life to have Tibetan friends and to know something about Tibetan Buddhism and the Tibetan way of life. And so, emboldened by these 2 insights, these 2 feelings, and having told you who I am and where I come from, I will now turn to the topic, the promotion of religious harmony in the world today, and share with you some ideas about how harmony may be fostered in practical ways, and how we can both transcend religion in the way suggested above, or, if we choose, deepen our own religions, soften them, and make them more accepting of other faiths. When one sets out on a journey, whether intellectual or physical, it is often, though not always, a good idea to have some sense of where one is going. And so I will tell you right from the start what my message is and where this talk will be tending. As a teacher, I see the key to promoting religious harmony and other deeper kinds of social and political harmony too, is in school and university and at home to promote the fundamental human qualities of mutual understanding and respect, compassion and kindness, qualities that are universal and do not depend on religion, but are common to all religions. I will give you some thoughts about how I and other teachers of literature and history try to do this, giving also brief insights into what I see as the most pressing intellectual issues and obstacles that stop teachers achieving this aim. In his book entitled Beyond Religion, to which I will refer throughout this talk, His Holiness draws the distinction between the theistic religions, such as Islam and Christianity, and non-theistic religions, such as Jainism and Buddhism, and says that ethics does not depend upon the existence of God or a God, but that an ethical attitude arises out of simply being human. I quote, "I do not agree," writes His Holiness, "that ethics requires grounding and religious concepts or faith. Instead, I firmly believe that ethics can also emerge simply as a natural and rational response to our very humanity and our common human condition." End of quote. His Holiness writes about the possibility of what I am going to call a religion beyond religion, what he calls basic human spirituality. And he says that this underlying human disposition towards love, kindness, and affection, unquote, does not depend on a religious framework. So, to be clear, our ethical ideas can come from the things we observe in ourselves and in others around us, rather than from any revealed source of ultimate wisdom, a divine book, a holy book, or set of religious teachings. We can use the evidence of our own experience in making our religious and ethical sensibilities, and we do not need to depend, the word means literally to hang from, we do not need to depend on divine laws that are communicated to us via prophets. This idea is underlined by the philosopher Daniel Dennett, who writes in his 1995 book, Darwin's Dangerous Idea, about the difference between science and religion. He conceptualizes science as building structures and ideas from the ground of empirical observation upwards into what he calls a crane. This is quite different from the skyhook of belief. He calls it the skyhook of belief, which necessitates a system of ideas not grounded in empirically ascertainable data, but dependent upon supernatural revelation. The word dependent means hanging down from. So, our religion can be more akin to a human science, another term for the humanities, than to a religion as people generally understand it today. To Buddhists and to humanists and scientists, This view of things is familiar. We proceed from the known to the knowable, rather than depending for our ideas and our ethics on the presumed dictates of the ineffable, the unknown. His Holiness says that he does not think, and I quote, that humans will soon be ready to dispense with religion altogether, unquote. But he does seem to be advocating a secular religion and ethics based on our commonly shared and agreed humanity, rather than on the revelations of the world's religions. He uses the metaphor of tea to explain his idea, and I quote, "The tea we drink is composed mostly of water, but it also contains some other ingredients, tea leaves, spices, perhaps some sugar, or at least in Tibet, salt. And this makes it more nutritious and sustaining, and something we want every day. But however the tea is prepared, the primary ingredient is always water. While we can live without tea, we can't live without water. Likewise, we are born free of religion, but we are not born free of the need for compassion." End of quote. So, our many religions are like the spices and the tea leaves, the salt, the sugar, the yak butter if you live in the cold climate of Tibet, and the basic underlying element of water, that life-giving substance on which all life depends. His Holiness stresses the importance of this main ingredient, water, compassion, in all human relations, and points out repeatedly that compassion is the heart of all the major religions. In other words, there is a religion beyond religions, which does not contradict any of the religions of the world, and yet, crucially, does not depend on them either. It is the attitude of kindness and compassion and mutual understanding. And I believe that promoting such attitudes, we can liberate people from the snares and extreme sects of institutionalized and fanatical religion, allowing them to become better people and better Christians or Muslims or whatever other religion they choose. Or some might choose the agnostic path and aspire simply to be better, kinder people, more understanding of themselves and others. As a teacher, it is interesting to see that often in Beyond Religion, in his book, His Holiness expresses the conviction and the hope that what he calls universal education will be the bedrock of this new attitude of universal compassion. And being a teacher, it is to education, therefore, that I want to turn and ask how we teachers and also parents can foster compassion and insight in our classrooms and homes with our children and young adults. Like many teachers, I consider myself to be a humanist. What does this mean? It means simply that in all the texts we teach and in all of the discussions we have with students, we try to lead them to see that things can be understood in human, essentially psychological and sociological terms. In this, humanism and Buddhism are, as we have seen, alike, for both want to understand the problems and mysteries of life in human and not only in religious terms. My classes are made up of predominantly students who are agnostic or atheist, or who come from Christian or Muslim backgrounds. And yet we can discuss the deepest issues, what seem on the surface to be religious issues, in purely secular, human, psychological terms. I will give one example of such a discussion, the South African writer J.M. Coetzee published a book entitled Age of Iron in 1990. It is set in the last dark days of apartheid. You will remember we had our first democratic elections in 1994, 4 years later, when there was a lot of unrest in the country and people were asking what was going to happen after the end of rule by a minority white government. And all the people of South Africa had come together in political unity where all, not just whites, had the right to vote and participate in public life. The central character of the novel is an old white woman dying of cancer. Mrs. Curran has to learn to love the other. This is a term used by teachers in post-colonial literary studies, which means that which is conceived as the most different from oneself and one's own culture. That's what the other means. And is therefore, the other is therefore seen as threatening and as needing to be kept at bay, to be kept away from one. Mrs. Curran has to learn to break out of her loneliness and isolation and redefine love and care for the other, for others. Not as the easy love of a mother for her daughter, but as the feelings of concern and compassion and altruism and care for those around her, others. She has to learn, as she puts it in the book, to love that which is most resistant to love. The novel meditates on the idea of damnation and salvation, which seem at first to be terms that belong only in the religious domain, but which, upon closer inspection, can be understood in more immediately graspable psychological and sociological terms. Coetzee plays with the double meanings of words. Mrs. Curran speaks of the Afrikaans nation as being a dam nation, as a nation wanting to keep its blood pure in a dam. Now, a dam is the South African word for what in India would be called a tank or a lake, where water is stored. It is this stagnation and isolation that damn these people, literally and figuratively. Just as Mrs. Curran's isolation in her house in Cape Town damns her, keeping her from interacting with and learning to love the other. In her thinking about such issues, Mrs. Curran also plays with the word apartheid, which in the Afrikaans language means being apart, and which, as you know, was the policy of the nationalist, predominantly Afrikaans government that implemented apartheid, cementing centuries of social and colonial discrimination when it came to power after the Second World War. Mrs. Curran writes of blood as the sustainer of life, red despite skin color, and of the blood of the Afrikaners in a place apart. That word apart is important. She wonders if this blood will ever mingle with the blood of all humanity at the end of time, in a great sea of blood, which she compares to Lake Baikal in Russia, the deepest inland lake. And I'm quoting now from the novel. Mrs. Curran is meditating. A sea of blood come back together. Is that how it will be at the end of days? The blood of all, a Baikal sea, scarlet black, under a wintry blue Siberian sky, ice cliffs around it, its snow-white shores lapped by blood. Viscous means thick, sluggish, slow. The blood of mankind, restored to itself, a body of blood of all mankind? No. In a place apart, that word is important. In a mud-walled dam, that word is important. in the karoo with barbed wire around it and the sun blazing down, the blood of the Afrikaners and their tribute bearers still stagnant. End of quote. The Karoo is a very dry and semi-desert region of South Africa. So, damnation, the damnation, is conceived of as arising from being apart from others. And this apartheid, literally this being apart, this willfully being apart from others, is seen as leading to stagnation and death. At the beginning of the novel, Mrs. Curran too is damned, isolated from the community made up of people of color around her. She asks again and again, how can she be saved, safe, mentally uninjured? And we soon come to see that this is the root idea of the religious concept of salvation. Save, safe, salvation. What seems to be a religious discussion is really a psychological and a social one, and ethical. And she comes to realize as the novel progresses that her route to salvation, to safety, to being saved, to being whole, is to break out of her isolation, both physical and mental, and to see and understand her interconnectedness with the people around her. I guess a Hindu or Buddhist would call that interdependence. The students reading this book soon come to see for themselves that what seems to be exclusively religious terminology can be understood in basic human psychology. Even the idea of holiness, surely a purely religious concept, is actually taken from the same physical metaphor as that underlying salvation. Healing, making whole, holy. Holiness is wholeness. Salvation comes from the Latin word salus or salvus, which is the root of words like salve, salutary, i.e. things promoting health, wholeness. Healing salvation is holiness, is wholeness. Damnation or brokenness is apartness, a sense of brokenness and separation from others and from oneself. In the novel, the ultimate symbol of this, shall we call it a humanization and secularization of seemingly religious terms, is the figure of the dog, which in Coetzee's novel stands for altruism, unconditional love. The kinds of devotion that Mrs. Curran and the whites of South Africa need to learn if they are to achieve salvation, redemption, wholeness, holiness. After the destruction wrought on South Africa by centuries of colonial violence, violence means literally violating, breaking, and 4 decades of apartheid, apartness. It is no coincidence that the word dog is an anagram of the word God. Just changing the order of the letters changes the meaning of the word. Here is a mundane symbol of devotion and love and unconditional acceptance. At one point in the novel, Mrs. Curran eats bread and drinks wine with Verkay, one of the most important other figures in the novel, whom she learns over the course of the novel to love. The bread and wine is symbolic of the Christian Mass, the Eucharist, in which the bread and wine sanctified by the priest are transformed into the body and blood of Christ. As Mrs. Curran becomes drunk with the wine, she feels the comfort of Verkay's presence. His dog is there too, licking her salt tears, whining with joy. She becomes whole, holy, safe. Her pain disappears. She is saved, quite literally, as well as in the deeper senses of the word, we have been discussing. The students thus get the chance to look at apparently religious concepts in purely human and psychological and social terms, and come to see that understanding and accepting the interrelations that bond all people, whether they see these interrelations or not, is the route to salvation for themselves and for themselves in the context of others. There is an African saying, "A person is a person because of other people." This is the lesson that the novel teaches, and it does so in a way that allows students of all faiths, or of no faiths at all, to share and talk about the same ideas without any of the dogmas of particular religions, so that we can discuss together, come together in one place, what it is that makes us unhappy, broken and damned, and what it is that makes us happy, whole and holy, part of the greater humanity that sustains us. The novel also allows Christian students to interrogate concepts such as holiness and salvation and deepen their understanding of them in historical, if not spiritual, terms. The study of literature, thus, gives us a way of coming together from all different faiths and backgrounds and vicariously experiencing the pain of others, that is, experiencing it in the imagination, and understanding them in a language that is universal, humanistic. Reading, and reading deeply, is in itself an ethical activity because it allows us to go outside of our own narrow worlds and ideas and belief systems and to see the world from the point of view of the other, of others. His Holiness calls in beyond religion for secular techniques for generating empathy and even compassion. He speaks of mental cultivation. He uses the Sanskrit term bhavana, literally cultivation, and makes this all-important point, and I quote, "For all the associations of meditation or mental cultivation with religion, there is no reason why it should not be undertaken in an entirely secular context. After all, mental discipline itself requires no faith, no commitment. All it requires is a recognition that developing a calmer, clearer mind is a worthwhile endeavor, and an understanding that doing so would benefit both oneself and others." End of quote. He goes on to speak about the difference between what he calls discursive or analytic meditation and the second kind, absorptive meditation. It is the first kind of meditation that humanist teachers are good at emulating in their classrooms. And it is my firm belief that we can help future generations of people to become kinder, gentler, softer, more compassionate and ready to listen to others if we teach them how to read deeply and sensitively and search beneath and beyond the words, to experience the feelings of pain of others and to see ultimately their interconnectedness with all other beings. As the saying goes, a person is a person because of other people. So, careful humanistic reading which fully engages the imagination and the analytical faculty is a way of understanding reality in a profound way, in a way that is possibly not entirely dissimilar from the way monks and meditators follow the chains of ideas to their roots to get at the underlying causes of things in samsara. Indeed, this is what we do when we read closely. We look at the world of the text and try to trace the actions of characters to their sources, their deepest motivations, their seeds. In this, one of the great challenges we face as teachers is the superficiality of the judgments that our students have about things, as well as the fact that social media can act as an echo chamber for ideas one already holds, rather than challenging those ideas, showing one new ways of seeing and being. His Holiness speaks of the importance of teaching the complex interdependence of ideas on page 77 of Beyond Religion, and of trying to break the simplifications of phenomena of reality that are so deeply embedded in our cultures and religions. Z happens because of Y, where in reality, Z has a multiplicity of causes, some knowable, but the vast majority unknowable, hidden forever from the unenlightened consciousness. As His Holiness puts it, we have an unfortunate tendency to view problems, and I'm quoting His Holiness now, and indeed everything from too narrow a perspective, unquote. If we can just teach our students to see more deeply and more broadly in their reading of the texts we give them and of the texts of their own experience, then we will save them from the tyranny of oversimplification. I always tell my students that the word because, which is made up of two words, by and cause, should always be used with great care, and as many causes given as possible, never just one, as is implied by the word by cause, one cause. If we can teach our students to be aware in their language and therefore in their thoughts of the complexity of things, it might help them to be less easily judgmental and to wait and consider rather than delivering easy judgments of others. I guess that at the deepest level, what I am saying is that we should teach our children and students to read deeply and to become aware of the power of language in shaping their own realities in the world, for better or for worse. In this way, they will learn to liberate themselves from the rhetoric and systems that exist in the world to entrap them, and they are more likely to become kinder and more compassionate people, better people generally, and better Christians or Muslims or Hindus who understand the complexity of experience and have learned that things are more complex than any one simple explanation of it can fully account for. We need to teach them also to be quieter, to weigh the power of their words and judgments before they utter them. So, if we can help our students and children to go deeper and to become quieter and to be aware of oversimplifications and one cause explanations, then we will inoculate them against the diseases of religious bigotry, social bigotry, racial bigotry, and against the power of the media as well, which often seeks to entrap them into being consumers of ready-made products, whether physical or metaphysical, above the physical, like systems of ideas, like religious sects. I promised at the outset of this talk that I would address the practical things that we can begin doing right now to promote religious harmony and harmony more fundamentally. And in case it is not clear, I am suggesting that mastery of language and discourse, both analysis of existing texts, as well as shaping and writing new systems, creating one's own reality, lead to freedom. The freedom to interpret and build and respond to others in the world around us. If we can give such skills to our children and students, the power to see deeply into structures and texts, and the power to use these elements in the shaping of their worlds, then we are liberating them from the tyranny of fundamentalisms of all sorts, making them wiser and kinder and more compassionate human beings. And also better, more self-aware Catholics or Buddhists or Muslims or whatever religion they want. I would like to end this talk with the practical advice I promised for teachers and parents. There are some phrases we can all teach our children or share with our students, tricks of language which are actually movements of the mind, to make them more open and receptive to reality and more compassionate and less easily locked into systems that trap and deaden them. In all my classes, I try to establish the use of such phrases, such ideas, as the following. I teach them to say, "I don't know," or "I reserve the right to change my mind at any moment," instead of being stuck in one particular way of seeing. "I'm sorry, I think I might be wrong." "I am wrong. I think you might be correct. Let me think about it before I answer." Such phrases. It is important to establish self-insightful ignorance as a virtue, not as something to be ashamed of, and to give our students the power to change their ideas and themselves. We need to teach them that fixed things and ideas are not realistic and are more likely to cause them and those around them pain. How often do we not get into arguments with others on false grounds? We have not properly stated our own position or understood theirs, and yet we feel forced into defending and attacking. This is not an exchange of ideas. It is simply a clash of egos. How about these phrases? "I am not quite sure how to express this, but let me try this." Or, I think that. Or, "I am not sure about this, but it seems." That word "seems" is very important. Whatever it seems. We need also to question the prevalent idea in many cultures that belief, being a believer, is a sign of strength. What is wrong with doubt? What is wrong with uncertainty? With being one who questions things? We need to move from the indicative mood, where you tell people things, to the subjunctive mood, where you express possibilities. Teach our students to use the language that allows them to deal in hypotheses and possibilities rather than certainties. It is so. Let the subtlety and freedom of "it might be so" outweigh the brashness and arrogance of "it is so." And then there are the magic words. What do you think? This question stimulates active listening, students entering into dialogue with others, the text, the system, with themselves, with the world about them. I often suggest to students that they should get into conversations with people they would not normally engage with, just to see and feel something new and to make connections that would otherwise not exist. It can be a very liberating and illuminating experience. Or how about this phrase? "I am uncertain and I don't yet know what to think, so I will not say anything yet." His Holiness reminds us, and I quote, "Human discernment, understanding, is always incomplete. Unless we are clairvoyant or omniscient, like Buddha or like God, we will never see the entire picture, and we will never know all the causes that have given rise to any situation. If we do not know something, it is better to admit it openly than to feign certainty out of misplaced pride or vanity." End of quote. And we need to get our students to look inwards as much as outwards, to understand that they too are complex texts that need to be lovingly and carefully read and understood. His Holiness speaks about the, quote, process of emotional awareness, unquote, and says that if we can develop this, we can, quote, work our way back along the causal chain with the ultimate goal of calling or eliminating afflictive emotion altogether, unquote. If we can impart some of this self-reflexivity and quietness in our students and children, rather than asking them for their immediate responses, we can help them to learn to listen to both others and to themselves, rather than give quick and clever responses before others have even finished talking or they have had a chance to interrogate their own minds. What about suggesting students wait for 10 seconds before answering a question? In silence is liberation, liberation from the tyranny of words, discourse, argument, liberation from their own selves, their own conceptions and misconceptions, and a small seed of silence that can grow into a new structure, a new understanding of the world. I believe that as educators, we can help our students become softer and less judgmental, to give others the chance to speak and help them to articulate their realities before feeling the need to impose our own wills on them. If we can do this, we can do much to make the world more religiously and politically tolerant, to be quiet and listen respectfully, ready to change and to feel because of what others say. The recent American election has shown us all how stark the dichotomies between people have become and how harsh the rhetoric, the language. Across the world, totalitarian governments are asserting themselves, silencing the opposition. In Tibet, Buddhism and Tibetan culture. In Hong Kong, democracy and freedom of expression. In Xinjiang, Islam. And very nearly in America, democracy and freedom of expression. There is little sense in all of this suppression of people listening respectfully to others and acknowledging their differences, yet granting others their humanity. When you attack someone's religion, you are attacking their very essence. For religion is an expression of the cultural and social life of a people, as much as it is an expression of religious dogmas and teachings. And so is essentially about identity, about who people choose to be. When you reject another's religion, you are rejecting them as human beings. If all people could come together in humility and be prepared to listen to others, we might recognize the humanity of the other, and in doing so, reduce our mutual fear and hostility. If we could teach our children and students to listen to others with open hearts and minds, the softening will deepen, and there will be place for all, regardless of their politics or religion, in a kinder and quieter and safer world. I wish you all the very best and long life to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tony Steele, former chairman of Dalai Lama in Australia, and was involved in tours from His Holiness through Australia since 2005, 2006 to the most recent, and to the winding up of our organisation in the last year. So I've had some time, but of course there are lots of other people involved, and I didn't do a third of the work. Okay, so I've been asked to speak about the 4 commitments of His Holiness, a topic which I don't profess to be particularly knowledgeable, but I think maybe I've been asked because I've been able to, having spent some time with His Holiness touring around Australia, on a number of tours, I've been able to see, how His Holiness interacts with people, what he talks about, particular types of events, and maybe, it's given me some insight into, how he views these commitments. So I start with a story. Like, this typically could happen at any particular event. Someone at the back of the event stands up and says, okay, to ask a question, says, His Holiness, what is the meaning of life? Now, that has been asked so many times at events that I've attended that I've lost count. and His Holiness, gives a variety of answers, but generally he says quite simply, the purpose of life is to be happy. So I just thought this question and answer really addresses and gets to the heart of the first commitment. His Holiness's commitment to fostering basic human values, and it shows the simplicity of the answer. I think it really shows His Holiness's great skill in boiling down very complex issues like what is more complicated than the meaning of life to just a very simple, clear messages that people can really relate to. And so in this way, I think this is a similar pattern with each of the four commitments that I've seen, on the various tours of His Holiness and in the questions and answers that he receives. So let's look at this first commitment of fostering this core human value of love and compassion and tolerance, these sort of values. And this is certainly, I think, the one that captures the wider public attention, or and it's really what drives people to come and attend, these big mass events that His Holiness has. We call them, in the business, we call them public talks. And often you hold them in a convention centre or a football stadium. And some of these events have been, in the tens of thousands of attendees. People are coming because of what His Holiness has to say about this, this basic human values, how to be happy, how to feel compassion and how to have love for one another, things like this. So at these events, I just think it's quite interesting that His Holiness often he'll dodge what he regards as a religious question, where he'll say something like, Nirvana is Buddha's business, or something like that, something funny, and everyone would laugh. But basically, he's trying to, from what I've seen anyway, in my observation, he's trying to give really a secular answer. This is his first commitment gets. It's really a secular approach to ethics, and particularly the needs of our modern education system to teach kids this basic human values of compassion and love and so forth. So I think that's one of the things I've been able to detect. So this second commitment, like to foster religious harmony, this is another big one. So His Holiness is in tours to Australia and all around the world. He goes in much the same pattern in lots of different countries. His Holiness, shares the stage with religious leaders of all sorts of denominations. He visits temples, he goes to churches. They hold these interfaith services. Famously, he's got these friendships with religious leaders such as Archbishop Desmond Tutu. So I think there's that sort of very visible signal of his commitment to interreligious harmony by the way in which he interacts with other faiths. But also, I think just at a basic level, one of the things that I've seen, that this strength of his commitment to religious harmony is shown when, at the beginning of a teaching event, for example, when he's coming to a country and speaking about a Buddhist topic, His Holiness will infrequently say, okay, I think it's probably best if you don't convert to Buddhism. I'm not trying to do that here. I'm just giving you a lecture on philosophy. And in fact, it's actually probably better if you don't change your faith, and that can lead to lots of confusion. So I think that's really, I'm always struck by that when he says that, because, you know, you would think that what he's trying to do is the opposite, but no, he gives that he gives the warning, at the start. And I think that really goes to the heart of his, you know, his real desire not to inflame disharmony, and to make sure that religions, you know, the religions are maintain this harmony. So then the third commitment, which is His Holiness's special commitment to the Tibetan people and to their culture, and this is obviously never far from view. And you know, wherever His Holiness travels in the West, you know, there's always a small but, you know, very vocal and adoring group of Tibetans that are, you know, in tow, just outside the hotel or just outside the venue, or, you know, inside. So it's always there. And, you know, no matter how busy His Holiness is on tour, you know, no matter how packed the schedule is, and believe me, it's packed. He hasn't got a minute to spare. And no matter how exhausted he must feel at various points within these trips, His Holiness always makes time to, you know, have meetings, and sometimes big, you know, sometimes quite large meetings with, you know, with the local Tibetan community in that city. You know, it's sort of, and it's wonderful to, you know, to be at those meetings, and it's and see the, you know, the real faith that the Tibetans still have in His Holiness. So then the fourth commitment, which is this one around, you know, maintaining the ancient Nalanda traditions of inquiry, and there's, yeah, I get the sense very much, you know, I wasn't quite aware of this commitment until recently. Tracy pointed out to me, and I think probably it's been something that's been evolving over the years. So in the various teaching events, you know, I've already said that there are events where His Holiness just focuses on some aspect of Buddhist philosophy. So, you know, whenever he's doing so, he frequently makes the point that even the Buddha said that, you know, his teachings should never be accepted out of faith alone, but they should be subjected to some sort of analytical inquiry, in the way that, you know, that the gold is tested and for its authenticity and its purity. So to check up, he says, check up. So this approach is very much at the heart of the Nalanda tradition, and it's important also not just to students of Buddhism. I think this is really the point that His Holiness is making. So over many years, His Holiness has been meeting with scientists at the Mind and Life conferences internationally, and even when he comes to Australia and attends the Happiness and its Causes conferences, he's been meeting regularly with scientists in lots of different fields. So I had the opportunity recently to ask His Holiness what he thought his main contribution had been to these scientific dialogues. And His Holiness replied that he thought his main contribution had been to introduce this Nalanda approach to analytical inquiry, particularly as regards to the mind and emotions, in a much more rigorous way that we don't necessarily find in modern science. So, you know, I think that was quite a fascinating answer. I thought it might have been something. Might have said something different, and so I think that's really shows. Probably also showed why His Holiness has been saying for quite some time that he refers to himself as a half monk, half scientist. So, you know, I think that's how deep this sort of tradition of inquiry is within his psyche. So, of course, as a elder statesman on the world stage, His Holiness regularly makes observations about many different topics, many different aspects of human experience. For example, on his visits to Australia, he's always very keenly interested in the welfare of Indigenous Australians. And in fact, at his own request, he made a trip to Uluru in Central Australia, and we really had a memorable meeting there with the local community of Aboriginals, and at one of the townships, and it was an amazing meeting. And it was really quite touching to see His Holiness as concern for Aboriginal issues, particularly around healthcare and opportunities that they have. So, and also, I think we're all aware now that His Holiness has been making frequent and increasingly urgent calls for action around things like climate change. And so this is obviously a big issue that's outside the 4 commitments. So I think, yes, the 4 commitments have been incredibly important, but it's very hard to limit His Holiness to just 4 things. Okay, so I hope that I've at least given you some insights into maybe sort of the everyday consequence of these commitments and how they sort of play out in the events that His Holiness participates in. It's been, of course, a great honour of mine for me to be involved in organising these tours, and even just in a small part. And I'm looking forward to hopefully having that opportunity again if I'm so lucky. So thank you very much.
This video was originally recorded November 2020 at Menla Retreat and Dewa Spa in Phoenicia, New York.
I'm Professor Emeritus, which means retired, Robert Thurman, and I'm Ari Kenyan Tenzin Chodak also, and I've been asked to say a few words about His Holiness the Great 14th Dalai Lama's 4th aim in life. For years now, he has talked about 3 aims in life, which are as a human, and we just did a big Dalai Lama Global Vision 2021 summit, online summit with the Lion's Roar magazine that I hope a lot of people enjoyed and are still enjoying. I'm still enjoying. I didn't even see all of the pieces in it myself, and we there did on basis of the 3 aims, which were as a human, common human values of kindness, love, compassion, wisdom, intelligence, all this sort of thing. As a Buddhist monk, better mutual understanding between the world religions, so there's no interreligious conflict anymore. And third one is as a Tibetan, speaking up for his people, for Tibetan culture, for Tibetan in the land and the environment and the glaciers and the headwaters of all the rivers of Asia in Tibet, as a Tibetan, and seeking freedom for the Tibetan and their Chinese neighbors and their Mongolian and Indian and Nepali and Persian and everybody. So those are his 3 aims. And now we have the 4th aim. The 4th aim is as a son of India. His Holiness has been proclaiming a lot lately, and he's done it way back, but more emphasizing lately that he's had more than 2/3 of his life has been in India. His body is more formed by rice and dal than it is by momo and zampa. And therefore he's a son of India. And as a son of India, his 4th aim is to bring back the elements of Indian mind science that were exported through translation into Tibet, and not only into the scriptures of Tibetan Kanjur and Tenjur, but also into the Tibetan culture and the way it functions, into its educational institutions, into its social, cultural patterns and forms. And to bring that back to India, which was the main culture of India from around the Buddha's time and the time of the ancient Upanishads and the founding of the Jainism around that time, and right up until the Islamic invasions from Persia and Tajikistan and so forth, and then on through the European domination of India, where they kind of lost that aspect of their culture. And so to bring it back and to reinforce and to re-encourage, and therefore the Indians are sort of modernized, and the British kind of anglicized them, and the education system based on the British one and based on modernity, and therefore based on scientific materialism. And yet the ancient Indian yogas of understanding how the mind and body work in a deeper way, he wants to reinforce it by bringing back those elements that were saved for them in Tibet, that were part of their classical Indian culture. And so, and to do that, he has founded recently, he's in the process of founding, under the former Prime Minister, a wonderful institution in Bodh Gaya called the Nalanda Institute of the Dalai Lamas. And he has already big monasteries in the south, in the Tibetan settlements there, in fact all over, and the Himalayan areas of India. There's still a big ethnic Buddhist and Tibetan population. But this is not, his fourth aim is not to make India Buddhist. Because in a way, when Buddhism did thrive in India, it wasn't making them all Buddhists even then. It loved the Hindu, the Hindu deities are all believed in by the Buddhists. Buddha was talking to Shiva and Vishnu and Brahma and everybody. And he likes them. And Hanuman loves Tibet. He practically created Tibet. And he defends Tibet in the future. And they have the same prophecies about Kalki, also the 10th incarnation of Vishnu, although they see it as a little different. They interpret things a little differently, but they provide another angle on the same things, is the point. And they enrich, therefore, and actually the great Indian philosophies, the Shaddarshana, as they are called, they were all elaborated in interaction with the Buddhist four Siddhantas, as they call them, the four different levels of theory in Buddhist philosophy and science. And really it's mind science. It's not a religious thing, it's a scientific thing, it's a cultural thing, and that's his fourth aim in life. And it's actually been my aim as a scholar, and all my life I was asked by His Holiness himself and by my old Mongolian teacher to set up institution to translate the entire canon of Tibetan works that were originally translated from Sanskrit into Tibetan. Starting 1300 years ago up until about 900 years ago, and bring it all back into Sanskrit, into Hindi, into Telugu, into Tamil, into Keralese, Malayalam, into Marathi, into Bengali, into all the Indian languages, and also Russian and Chinese. And most of it was not translated into Chinese. Some was. The scriptures, many of them were, but a lot of them, scientific ones, were not. And of course there has been a century or two of work translating into English and to the Western languages, and that should be part of the whole process. And when I complained to His Holiness and I said, how can I possibly do that in my life? They said, you can't, but you can get it started. It will take 3 or 4 generations, they said. So good, that's fine. That was in the 70s when I got that laid on me. So I love His Holiness's fourth aim, and I want to really participate in it. If I survive, I'm almost 80 years old myself. I'm 6 years younger than His Holiness. And he needs to stay. He promised to stay to 110. As a joke, at one time he ordered me to stay as long, at least 104. And so I might have 20 years until I'm 100, maybe. I had some grandparents who reached 100, so maybe I can. And I will be doing just this, aligned with these 4 aims of His Holiness, and especially emphasizing the 4th one, actually, even. But not ignoring the first 3 of his aims. They are my aims as well. I'm his student, his disciple, his devotee, and his colleague and friend. And it's possible to be all those different things in the wonderful mind science that His Holiness knows, where you have resilience of personality. You don't rigidly have only one identity and one thing, but you have the ability to adapt to different relations and different contexts. because everything changes, everything is totally relatable. That's Buddha's great insight. All things are totally interconnected and relatable. And in the process of doing that, of course, His Holiness will be very much focused on the environment as well as the culture and so on. So that's the fourth aim, okay? Thank you very much.
This online offering was brought to you in part through the generous support of the Tibet House US Menla membership community and viewers like you. Tashi Delek, and thanks for tuning in.